Welcome to As a Woman, Fertility Hormones and Beyond. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Crawford, and I am a board-certified OBGYN and fertility physician, and also co-founder of Fora Fertility in Austin, Texas. Each week on this podcast, I discuss health and fertility and how they relate to your true self. Become a part of the community of collaboration that amplifies others as a woman. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome back to the As a Woman podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Crawford. I'm a board-certified fertility doctor in Austin, Texas, and I myself struggle to get pregnant, just like many of you or many people we know. The rate of infertility for people who are trying to conceive in the United States is now 1 out of every 5. Worldwide, it's 1 out of every 6. And these numbers used to be 1 out of every 8. So we are living in a world with an increasing prevalence of infertility. At the same time, we are seeing less emphasis on talking about your fertility at a younger age, talking about what it even means, family planning, and really giving people the facts that they need to understand their body. This entire podcast and my entire social media journey, honestly, came from my own struggle to find the information that I need. And so a long-awaited life update plus more about my story that many of you may not know. Before we dive in, I do want to say I am so thankful to all of you. Some of my favorite episodes are our question and answer episodes. And if you would love to leave a fertility question, I would love to answer it. There's 2 ways that you can go and ask questions. One is going to be to send a voicemail to 657-229-3672. Again, that is 657-229-3672. And the other way is going to be to ask a question on Mondays on Instagram at nataliecrawfordmd. Every Monday you can go and ask a question, and I love answering those questions. Some of them on Instagram, some of them on the As a Woman podcast right here at the end of the episode, and some are going to be answered in the weekly newsletter. I have a lot of big updates, one of which we're going to be talking about, but the newsletter is absolutely a fantastic place to show your love and stay in touch. And I share things, discount codes, favorite products, recipes, that's probably what you guys love the most, and ultimately information that I find helpful. Talking about fertility in the news, myth busting, all of the above. If you would like to sign up for the newsletter, you can go to nataliecrawfordmd.com/newsletter. And very easy, name and email, boom, you're signed up. So again, you can ask your questions Monday on Instagram, or you can ask them on the voicemail at 657-229-3672. So if you have been around for a while or you know a piece of my story, hopefully you'll listen because I'm going to go into it a little bit more. Back when I started trying to get pregnant, I suffered from multiple pregnancy losses. So I was in the end of my OBGYN residency, which is a grueling time. And I've got to admit, I am an all or nothing girl, which really means I focus on everything about some things and nothing about the other. So in the period of life that was residency, I gave everything to being a doctor, everything. I studied, I poured my heart and soul into it. I worked the craziest hours, and I gave nothing to taking care of myself. I did not work out, I drank too much, I did not eat good, and ultimately was just burning the candle at both ends. But that's what was expected. I had worked so hard to get to that place. Nobody acted like there was any other option. And I had the 80-hour work week where you could only work 80 hours a week. That was instigated in my residency, meaning part of the time that didn't exist and then it did exist and nobody really abided by it. I will admit, if you're thinking about going into medicine, don't let that scare you, or don't let my bad role modeling be a deterrent. I see residents now. I know there are many programs that take great care of their residents. I loved my program. I came out of there an amazing physician, got into the fellowship I wanted to go to, and I have the job I have today because of the skills I learned. But my body suffered from it, y'all, 100%. All right, so I had 3 pregnancy losses in a row, and they were so traumatic. I had been on birth control pills for 12 plus years. I was happy on the pill. I had no side effects from them. I hated being off the pill, but stopped the pill, and then suddenly I had to take a whole 180, as in, all right, time to get pregnant, now what? And I am an OBGYN resident, and I'm sitting here saying, now what? So I can only imagine what the regular person must see. And so this was a little bit before the era of information online that we have now. And I would look in forums and read blogs and try to do a deep dive into the literature about natural fertility. How do you get pregnant naturally? That wasn't actually covered in OBGYN residency because we learned about periods and hormones and we learned about problems. So there was endometriosis and a lot of surgery, a lot of delivering babies and preeclampsia, managing postpartum hemorrhage, keeping you alive, PCOS. And when it came to fertility, learned some about when things are wrong, ovulation induction, a teeny weeny bit, and like a smidge of IVF. But what about the person who comes in and just wants to be pregnant and tracking your cycle and how many miscarriages are really too many and what should you do to try to prevent it? There was this whole gray area, and even as a resident, I didn't know the answers. And so I searched online to read what non-doctor people said. And immediately I knew this was wrong, even though I was doing it. I was so compelled. Should I take a baby aspirin or not? What about pineapple core? Do you think that'll help me stay pregnant? Is it my husband's sperm? Should he take some antioxidants? I was so desperate for answers that I was looking anywhere that I could find them. And some of these losses just traumatized me. I was bleeding in the bathroom of the L&D when I was the chief resident. Just sudden, started miscarrying, and there was no going home. Nobody knew I was pregnant, so I just had to carry on and go deliver babies and go do C-sections while I was miscarrying. I'd go to the bathroom, I would throw up because the cramps were so strong. I had to pull over driving home. I still remember, and stopped at a gas station, like a random gas station, to vomit and like hemorrhage. So I had clots coming from everywhere. I even have a scar on my nose on the very top because when I got back to my house, I was so sick from how intense the pain was of the miscarriage that the toilet seat fell and hit the top of my nose. Isn't that so embarrassing? But these are the things people don't talk about. How painful a loss is physically, emotionally, how much doubt and shame come with it. So I kept trying, searching for answers, trying to take care of myself better. Lost again, and got pregnant again when we were moving to North Carolina. So at this point, I knew I was an REI fellow, and we even bought our house when I was pregnant, and I knew what would be the baby room. And sure enough, by the time we got back to Dallas, after that trip of home hunting, I lost that pregnancy too. So I entered into fellowship losing 3 pregnancies already. So I asked my doctor before we moved, hey, what should we do? What can be done? And she's just like, just keep trying. You're getting pregnant. One of them will stick. There was no other advice. There was no other workup. There was no recommendation. And the things that I started asking about supplements or medications or diet or lifestyle were dismissed. But we were moving across the country, so I couldn't find somebody new, right? At this point, I had to just take that lack of helpful information and move across the country. So when we moved to North Carolina and I started my REI fellowship, finally, I've been looking forward to this. The learning curve is so steep. It's learning and stress on a whole nother level, but the hours are not nearly as bad. So was much more in a regular daytime shift job. And I'm learning, I'm stressed, but quickly realizing that something is truly wrong with me. This is not normal. I had some testing done and all the blood tests came back normal and got pregnant again. I was actually pregnant for my 4th time at our fellowship retreat. So all the REI fellows go to Utah, and there's a wonderful retreat for all of the 1st and 3rd year fellows. Very exciting bonding experience. It makes you really thrilled to be in the field and make connections. And you go rafting. There's this part of it where you go rafting. And I was so sick because I was 1st trimester pregnant, but I was so happy. I was like, okay, I am less stressed. Life is better. This is the one that's going to work. I told my co-fellow about this pregnancy, which I hadn't ever shared any of the others with anybody besides my husband. But this one, I opened up and I told her because I wasn't feeling good on the trip and we were sharing a room together. And I told her, and she was so excited for me, but she couldn't understand why I wasn't that excited. So I told her about all the losses and why I was negative Natalie, that this was going to work out. And she was very positive, like, we'll draw some HCG levels, we'll follow it. And so we did. And if you've ever been in the position where you've done fertility treatment or had a loss or had HCG checked, That's the pregnancy hormone that shows up on a pregnancy test. So HCG would be checked, and it's supposed to double every 48 hours if it's rising normally. And so it did. We checked it. We checked it 2 days later, 2 days later, 2 days later. So many times, more than just once. And it looked beautiful. And I finally, for the first time, felt like it was going to work out. This is going to be the one, this shift in life, and I'm taking better care of myself. This is going to pay off because nobody loves unexplained recurrent pregnancy loss. But I started bleeding in the bathroom. It was spotting. It was much different. Spotting in the bathroom as a fellow. And I got really worked up and nervous. But this was just some brown spotting. It wasn't a full-on bleed, But I was hopeful that things were going to be different this time around. One of the pros about being a fertility fellow when all this was going down is that there were plenty of ultrasounds all around me. So my dear third-year fellow took me into the ultrasound room, did an ultrasound, and sure enough, there was no baby inside that uterus. I had an ectopic pregnancy, and I actually had an ovarian ectopic, which if you're in the OBGYN world, not good. Not good. Very, very suboptimal. So instead of even just a tubal ectopic, I had it on my ovary. What world are we living in? That's typically surgery. You might lose your whole ovary. I was distraught. But we decided we would try methotrexate because it was still pretty early. See if that could get the job done. Methotrexate is a medication. It's a chemotherapy. It's also an immune modulator. It's used for certain autoimmune diseases in different dosing. Then it's used for an ectopic pregnancy, which is different dosing than used for chemo. Methotrexate is a huge shot, beyond big shot. It goes in your butt. They have to divide it into two. It hurts so freaking bad. It's what we call a folic acid antagonist, meaning it blocks the step in folic acid metabolism that's essential for cell growth and division. Therefore, if cells can't grow and divide, a pregnancy can't keep growing and dividing. That's how it works for chemo as well in higher doses, more cells, and it targets those rapidly growing and dividing cells, which are the cells of cancer, a pregnancy, and then the side effects usually stem from those other rapidly growing, dividing cells. Often like the stomach lining, which is why you can get vomiting and get nauseated, and you can have really bad muscle aches. You could have hair loss at chemo doses, not at ectopic doses. Methotrexate feels like you got hit by a bus. That's the best way I can describe it. And here I am getting diagnosed with an ectopic pregnancy, an ovarian ectopic, can rupture, lead to emergent surgery, trying conservative management, and my husband's at a bachelor party in Las Vegas. Not his fault, but that's where he is. So I have to call him, tell him the situation, and he wants to come home, which I told him he didn't have to, but of course he wanted to come home. And so I'm in the position now to get this shot, knowing that if my symptoms worsen, if I end up having pain or any symptoms, because you can still rupture an ectopic pregnancy even after you get the methotrexate. But I get the methotrexate and I felt miserable, crying, the worst muscle pain, pain in my bones, so nauseous. I can't put it into any other words besides I felt like I got hit by a truck. And luckily my third-year fellow, first person in my whole career, she said, stay home. And I try to be the big, tough REI fellow, the OBGYN resident that I was trained to be. So as a fellow, she said, stay home, you're getting methotrexate today, don't come in tomorrow. And I was like, no, I'm absolutely coming in. She said, no, you're not. You're going to stay home. I'm so thankful for that moment because sometimes we just feel like we have to live up to these expectations and we put these barriers to success on ourselves. I would have been miserable coming in. I would have been no help to anybody. More people would have known what was going on, which I wasn't quite ready for. But I was so thankful because I wasn't trained in a medical environment that allowed me to ask for what I needed. I wasn't, but she knew and she gave it to me. And I've always remembered that because sometimes somebody doesn't want to ask, they don't want to get permission. And if you're in a position of power, if you're in a position of leadership, please remember, it's so hard to be going through personal things, no matter what they are. You can really impact somebody's life. So I stayed home. I got the methotrexate. It was terrible, but thank goodness it worked. I didn't have to go to surgery. But one of the other really mean things about methotrexate is it lasts in your body for so long that you can't get pregnant for 3 months afterward. Because folic acid is so important in cell division, but especially important in the formation of the brain and the spinal canal and the spinal cord, that you're at risk for spina bifida, neural tube defect, and encephaly if you do conceive in that time window. This felt like insult to injury for somebody who'd been trying to get pregnant for years, wasn't, now with the fourth loss. And here I am, it feels further back than normal, feels further back than everybody. My friends are getting pregnant with their second, and I've got nothing to show for it. That's how it felt. And I have a forced time off. I can't even try. Well, you may or may not know that I was a nutrition major in college. So I really had a hard time believing that nothing about my life was contributing to this situation I was in. It felt a little bit too coincidental. And at this time, especially as I was in fellowship now, and we had to start choosing research projects. And most people pick research in the basic science lab because in REI fellowship, it's 3 years. 3 years are clinical, 3 years are research. And to sit for your boards, you have to sit for these different sections of the oral boards. But you have to have a published thesis. You have to defend the thesis as one of the sections. And basic science projects are just easier to defend than clinical ones. But I was so done with the circumstance I was in. I did basic science research at length in residency. It helped me match into fellowship, and I'll be eternally grateful that I did it. But I didn't feel like it would benefit me much more, meaning I was not going to be a basic scientist, 100%. But I loved clinical research. I loved it. I was reading these papers and understanding how different so many of them are. And there was actually a lot out there about fecundability or natural pregnancy, but trying to interpret all of it, and none of the questions I really had were answered. So at this moment, boom, I went to my fellowship mentor and I said, I don't want to do basic science. I want to do clinical research. I want to study natural fertility and fecundability. One of the faculty members at my program was an expert in this. She did large studies looking at different aspects of natural fertility and epidemiology. And they said, well, if you're going to do that, you have to get a master's in clinical research so you can sit for your boards. And we'll pay for it. They paid for it. I was like, sign me up 100%. I can now learn even more about clinical research, get my master's, learn all about stats. And I dove hard into papers, into research, and I published a lot about fecundability. So you can go look through all my list of publications. And during this time period, I really became quickly overwhelmed with how many things cause inflammation in our bodies and how they are all connected to our fertility. And the reason why people don't draw these huge sweeping conclusions is because one study looks at a positive pregnancy test, and another might look at number of embryos created in a lab, and another might look at your hormone values, and another might look at the odds of having regular periods. The outcome points in reproductive health studies are so variable that it makes people not connect the dots. But if you step back from the picture, there's a map and the dots are connected. And so at this point, we eliminated so much from our kitchen. Plastics, Teflon, we got rid of all kinds of environmental chemicals. I had already stopped eating meat years before this, but at this point, we went on a full anti-inflammatory diet. I completely changed what we were eating, where it was sourced from, how we were cooking it, what kind of foods we were consuming. The short answer is that if it caused inflammation, it was out. Our plan was to do IVF at this point because that's the end point for recurrent unexplained pregnancy loss. If you don't have any phospholipid antibody syndrome or Hashimoto's, and you don't have diabetes, you don't have any endocrine or genetic factors, your karyotype's normal, then it's called unexplained, presumed to be due to a higher than normal percentage of aneuploidy or abnormal eggs or sperm. And the recommendation is IVF with genetic testing. And so that was the game plan. That's where we were going to go. I had to wait my 3 months. And because of my clinical schedule, we were waiting until the new year. I just wanted to get over this hump of where I was clinically. It's hard to go through IVF as a patient when you are the single IVF fellow. So there's that. So we were waiting for this to be right. And honestly, during the 3 months of the methotrexate wait, we changed things up so much. I felt amazing. Better than I had ever felt. And even at that moment, I didn't 100% understand what all it was from, but I knew that the things I was doing, they were making me feel better. I knew that I could tell when I was ovulating better. I had better egg white cervical mucus. I didn't have any spotting before my period started. And so I noticed these cycle changes. So we got pregnant naturally. I was like so mad, sure that we were going to set the clock backwards, that this wasn't going to work. But everything was amazing. And her name is Campbell. So years go on. After I give birth to her, and I breastfeed, and oh my gosh, that's a podcast for another day because breastfeeding is so hard. I started trying to think about a baby too. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I had it in me. Not that I didn't want a second baby, because I did. I have 2 sisters and I love them. But I didn't think I had 4 losses in me again to get there, and years of heartbreak and uncertainty, when I had this little bundle of joy that was sunshine. But I knew that I felt better when I did the things that I did before I got pregnant with Cam, and so decided to just do the anti-inflammatory thing really hard again, and honestly, in an attempt to just feel a little bit better postpartum. If you've ever had a baby and you've been postpartum, it just isn't yourself. And so I was leaning towards what made me feel better. And we got pregnant with Rhett. So I have 2 kids about 15 months apart. Even in my fellowship roast, they famously said that Natalie had extreme natural fecundability, which is like the irony of irony. Only one of my faculty members actually knew about all my losses, my ectopic, the one who prescribed the methotrexate, but all the others and the men who wrote these superlatives, they just knew I got pregnant twice and had 2 babies in fellowship. And so they even joked about how fertile I was. It's so opposite of reality. But as I started going through training, we really did not focus on helping people from a holistic side. And the messaging that we told people was still that medical treatment surpassed anything you can do. There was no counseling about what you should really be eating, minus avoid smoking cigarettes or alcohol once you're pregnant. There was no real counseling of any supplements besides take a prenatal vitamin. We didn't talk about environmental toxins at all. I gave an oral presentation as part of my research, my 3rd year of fellowship, about the impact of environmental toxins on fecundability. It's hard to talk about it. People don't understand. There's a lot of data out there. If you don't understand clinical research, cohort studies, population-based evaluations, people don't understand it. And sure, clinics make money by doing fertility treatments. And absolutely, there are people who will always have to do fertility treatments. The patient I just saw, who had both her tubes removed from ectopic pregnancies, will always need IVF. The man who has no vas deferens, has congenital bilateral absence of the vas deferens because he's a cystic fibrosis carrier, they will always need IVF with a sperm extraction. The couple who carries the genetic disease, if you are older and trying to have more than one child, you're going to need IVF. And sometimes we have unexplained infertility that is to a point where even the lifestyle changes we can make may not be alone enough. But the truth is, it doesn't mean that you're not smart enough to understand all the data and that you can't be empowered with knowledge. And I'm so over people hearing all the bad information that's out there. And you all know this because that's why I started this podcast, and that's why I started posting on Instagram. I started posting on Instagram once I was going through this phase of my own life. In fellowship, realizing that we all were the same. I was the same as every patient. They were asking questions that I was asking. They wanted answers that I wanted, and nobody was giving them to us. I remember being told that nobody wanted that information on social media, but it seemed like the best way to try to trick people into learning about their fertility when they weren't looking for it. And that's honestly what I thought I had to do. Posted a little bit about life as a doctor and a little bit of a fertility fact. And even when I started this podcast, if you roll back in time, I had women in medicine or basic life episodes mixed with fertility episodes because I felt like I needed to draw you to this podcast on something more than fertility alone. But all the top episodes, they're the ones that have nothing to do with anything that's not fertility, and most of them are natural fertility or basic facts, age and fertility, trying to get pregnant, tracking your cycles, PCOS, endometriosis, AMH, and the podcast started in 2019. And I have YouTube and I have the podcast and I have the Instagram, and that's great. But I've always wanted to be able to give people information in a more tangible product. In 2019, I wrote a nonfiction book proposal with the idea that I wanted this fertility facts in a book, targeted to the earlier version of me before I was in my own office as a patient, so that she could make changes in her life that could make a difference now. And she could know what questions to ask and what tests to be asking and what she should be evaluating and how she can make a difference and how she can advocate for herself. Because I didn't have it. I didn't have it then. And it turns out that I have celiac disease, which was diagnosed a decade after I went through all of this struggle. Not that the signs weren't there. Every time I went anti-inflammatory, one of the things I personally cut out was gluten because I didn't feel as good. I felt puffier. I was having a reaction to it. Not that everybody does, but I was. Yet I didn't understand. Nobody asked the right questions. Nobody connected the dots. Did they ask about my mom and her really bad Hashimoto's and my grandma and her rheumatoid arthritis? No. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to target the 30-year-old woman who wants kids one day, maybe soon, maybe not, but doesn't know should she stay on the birth control or should she not. And then that guide for when you start trying and you make the 180, what are you supposed to do? And then when you're going through and things aren't right, what should you do? And I knew there was no book like this because I looked for it and it didn't exist. So I wrote this beautiful proposal, and it took forever. This nonfiction book writing, another episode, but I wrote an entire proposal and found an agent, and nobody wanted it. Nobody thought that anybody was interested in this information, and it died. It was COVID, and it got shelved. There was nobody who was interested in it. And I still believed. You guys told me that you wanted it, and I still believed, but I was disheartened because I tried to find another agent over and over again. Other physicians who are out there, I pitched to their agent, talked to people, took hundreds of meetings over years, and I heard the same thing. The market's too saturated. Nobody will buy this book. Nobody's interested in a natural fertility book. And I did not believe it. You guys kept me going. So finally, dear Karen Tang, who, if you are online, she's a minimally invasive gynecologic surgeon. She's amazing. She wrote a book called It's Not Hysteria. And in the process of talking, I told her I had a book proposal and it has been shelved because there was no market. And sweet friend said, you're wrong. Or they're wrong. Nobody's seen it yet. It'll happen when it's meant to happen. And she connected me with her agent, who within a period of time, I met her agent. I was very pessimistic, said, you're going to tell me that nobody wants this book? I don't believe you, because my audience is the best ever, and they bought the course, they listen to my podcast, and they share it, and they are amazing, but people want this. But I don't feel like investing more time into it for you just to tell me there's no market for it, because I've heard that. I'm not typically that negative, but I just laid my cards on the table. I sent her my proposal. She wrote me back, said, hey, let's make these few edits. Let's sign you, and let's take it out for submission in a couple months. That's a whirlwind time because I'd been through this process a little bit before and it took a very long time. So the idea that I'm signing a contract in February and we're sending this sucker off to have potential meetings with editors in April was wild to me. But that's what happened. It went off. I had 5 meetings with U.S. publishers at the Big 5, and my book went to auction. And so there was a 3-round auction where I met with editors at big publishing houses who believed in this book and me just like you guys have. And I'm going to start crying here on the podcast because after years of being told no and that I should change it, that I should do something different, a different angle, I said no to that. I knew it was not going to happen unless this was the project because this was so desperately what I wanted so long ago. To then finally see people who saw it and saw the potential, to finally talk to people who believed in it and believed in me, and to watch them bid at auction to go defend it and get their whole team behind it. And I am beyond excited. So the book is going to be published with Penguin Life here in the U.S. I have the best editor. It was an amazing process. And we've had our launch meeting, which is this entire exciting situation. And currently the book is at auction in the U.K. So there's also going to be a UK publishing house. And I get to narrate the audiobook, and it's happening. So to all of you who have shown up and supported me, I love you. To people who've heard no, I started writing this book in 2019, and it is 2024. So sometimes things just take a while to get where they're meant to be. And if you're in the midst of infertility, all I can say is that I see you. I've been there. I love you. I am passionate about giving you all the information you can have to try to have an easier journey, to try to take control of what feels like an out of control process, and to help you advocate for yourself the absolute best. Thank you for listening to some of my story, why I'm so passionate about being here in this place and celebrating in my news, because I know that you are, and I'm so thankful to you. I promise we will do some more episodes soon, especially more about what does an anti-inflammatory lifestyle mean. Please sign up for the newsletter, nataliecrawfordmd.com/newsletter. So many book updates and handouts and exciting things pertaining to this very big passion of mine. And you can ask questions on Instagram at nataliecrawfordmd on Mondays. Q&A coming back next week. You can call and leave a voicemail at 657-229-3672. And even if you don't watch YouTube, but you want to go look Natalie Crawford MD up and subscribe, that's going to help my videos get more reach, which is going to help us get this information to more people. Thank you guys so much. Love you. Thank you for helping my dream become a reality. Thank you all for listening to As a Woman. It would mean so much if you could rate, review, and follow the podcast to be notified of new episodes every Sunday. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you share it with someone in your life. Be sure to follow along on Instagram at Natalie Crawford MD, and check out the YouTube channel Natalie Crawford MD. If you're interested in becoming a patient, you can also follow Fora Fertility. I'm so thrilled to have you here, part of the community that amplifies others as a woman.